twice. That way when I dip my head to read, you'll still hear me without hearing too loud. When we read through this, I'd like you to think in terms of kingdom with a capital K. Because as it's introduced, that's what you get. You get this very strong, who are the Gentiles, who are the Jews, how are we going to deal with the fact that God has called the entire world to be in right relationship with Him. And then as we review it in the next few minutes, then you'll have a chance to look at it, and hopefully we'll look at it on a little more personal level than just the universal salvation of mankind. Luke chapter 15, beginning in verse 1. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear him. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Does he not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I found my lost sheep." I tell you that in the same way there is more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Does she not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says again, "Rejoice with me, I found my lost coin." In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Jesus continued. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between the 2 boys. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I'll set out, go back to my father, and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him, 'What's going on?' 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so that I could go and celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your money with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' My son, his father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. You know the players. You know the stories. Can you imagine if you had 10 coins, your net worth was worth $100,000, and each of the coins was worth $10,000? Would you be a little bit agitated and motivated to try to find the $10,000 coin? You understand with regard to these percentages that God apparently is not a God of percentages. Since about 6th grade, I believe God is not a God of percentages, because I always had trouble with it. He clearly thinks that 10% of this estate is worth looking for. He goes on down to 1% and he says, oh my, even if 99% of what I possess is with me, I still am motivated to go and get that 1%. 1% loss in most businesses would be considered pretty good. But God doesn't work those percentages. And they do things consistently. They lose something, they find it, and they do something that I'm not very good at. They rejoice and celebrate. And they do it as a community. You see, these people live in community so that what happens to that woman who loses that coin is really important to her neighbor. It's really important to the people she goes to synagogue with. It's really important to her kinfolks. Many of them will never have traveled in their entire lives more than 5 or 10 miles away from where they live. And then there's the story that I think, for me, if you just run into me on the street and you want to know about the nature of God, I think this is a story that I try to share with you. And that's the story of the prodigal son. The younger son's pretty vehement about what he wants. He demands the estate. He squanders it. He hires out. He comes to his senses. This is the epiphany. This is the rock bottom that some have to hit before they decide, wow, as bad as it was at home. You know what the young man says that's tired of the rules? Shakes his fist at his dad and says, I'm going to go join the Marine Corps. I'm tired of all these rules. He has an epiphany. He comes back and he practices his speech. The Godfather was a movie that came out, I think, 78 years ago. But anyway, there's one scene that I recall where there's this hulking man. It's the day of the Godfather's daughter's wedding. And you can ask a request of the Godfather on the day of his wedding. So people come in and they bring gifts, and they have an audience with Marlon Brando's character in the film. And sitting outside waiting for his turn is this great hulking, he's playing the role of an enforcer, right? Nobody in the movies, in a mob movie, looks that big and ominous without being an enforcer. And he is practicing his speech to the Godfather. And it's rote memorization. It goes over it and over it again. Godfather, on the day of your daughter's wedding. And he goes over it and over it again. How many times did the son practice the speech on the way home? Over and over and over again. And so when he comes back to repent, this is etched deeply in his brain. I've got a great idea. I can't ever be a son again. The possibility of being a son when I've broken this relationship so horribly is not there. Let's not even dream of that relationship. But what I could do, I could possibly get a job. Couldn't live with the family in their house, but I could possibly get a job, and because of my dad's integrity and his largesse and his generosity, I could possibly make enough not only to eat, but maybe, just maybe, in that younger brother's mind, he thought, maybe I could pay back just a fraction of what I took from my dad. You see, the estate's gone. In the story, it's very clear. He divides the estate. He doesn't get to keep part of the estate. The share that goes to the younger brother is gone, and the share that he's given to the older brother, well, we just hope it's not gone. But it's not the father's anymore. the Father watching. Then we're very familiar with how embarrassing it would be for the patriarch of the family to hike up his skirts and run toward the Son. We're familiar with the embracing and the kissing. He won't let him get his speech out. You see, the speech has been planned over and over again, but he won't let him finish it because he refuses to allow him to make a deal that would place him anywhere below the level of relationship. And he says, put a ring on his finger, put shoes on his feet, put my robe, maybe one of the few things I've kept, put my robe on. And then he's going to do something, and this is really going to incense the older brother. There's a place in Pearland, Texas, that serves barbecue. And I've only been there twice, but I've eaten as much barbecue in 2 weekends as the average Jewish family would eat in a year. You don't kill the fattened calf. The fattened calf is not one of many fattened calves. There's not a feedlot out here where they're a dime a dozen. There's probably one, possibly only one, that some of these people have ever seen. This is huge. This might be saved for the daughter's wedding. It might just be saved for the favorite daughter's wedding. And he, without hesitation, says, because he's a father who knows how to celebrate, ring him, shoe him, put a robe over his shoulder, and without hesitation, celebrate as if my favorite daughter will be wed today. And then there's the older brother. Big picture, he's God's family. He's the Jews. He's working in the field. What a meritorious thing to do. He comes in and he finds out, brother's back. They're having a celebration. What really sends them over the edge appears to be that they slaughtered the fattened calf. And then he won't go inside. A horrible affront to his father. He won't go inside to celebrate. The father has to come out. He's angry. He's prideful. He's proud of his moral conformity. He tells you, you're familiar with this in the text, the person that immediately tells you how well they follow the rules, right? And unfortunately, about the time I'm telling God that this isn't fair, you know that line, don't you? The Bailey girls know that line. Anytime you mention to the Bailey girls, that's not fair, they'll immediately quote their dad. The fair comes to Dallas but once a year. Okay? Anytime I complain to the Father about how unfair this is, and by the way, God, we had a deal. See, I'd be baptized, and I'd work hard, and I'd take communion almost every Sunday, and I'd clean up my language, and I wouldn't cheat on my wife. And there's a whole list of stuff that I'm doing that are really depriving me. Right? And God, while I wouldn't say it out loud, God probably kind of owes me the fattened calf. Because you see, I am basing my relationship with the Father on my moral conformity. Hugely important that I follow the rules. Because although I don't like to say it out loud, I kind of do merit my relationship with God because I'm living such a clean, morally upright, conforming life. He is not a fan of the self-discovery of the younger brother. And he's sure that he doesn't deserve a celebration. Most of you are familiar with the Ephesians 5:25 verse that talks about husbands and wives. Wives are supposed to do something. I don't remember what it is, but it's very clear to me what the husbands are supposed to do in response to that. They're supposed to die. Yeah. You see, if a husband is called to play the role of Christ, and the bride is called to play the role of the church, then the husband is called to die for his wife. And you can see that. You can see we are dissipating our lives for our families. I'd take that a step further. Some of us are called to be parents, and we're literally dying in the service of, and we're happy to. It's easy for moms. Well, you know what happens. They go down in the valley of the shadow of death to actually give birth to their babies. They're right there dying or very close to it. Simply, how many of you, let's not take a show of hands, but your hair's not the same as it was before you had the babies. And your nails aren't the same. And there's possibility other parts of your body are being impacted by gravity in ways that they weren't before. You literally dissipated yourself physically to give birth to that child. You know, the baby might live while the mom literally in times has delivered a baby, but she's died, not of childbirth complications, because in places in the world, the child got all of the life-giving nutrients and vitamins and minerals and the nutrition that it needed to live. And so there have been a lot of babies born to dead mothers because the baby literally drew the life out of the mother. Husbands and fathers, I believe, in emulating God, are called on to die because that's what God did for his children. Listen to this from Lois Fairberg. I think if you don't have Walking in the Dust of Rabbi Jesus, this is really good to help those of us who are not Jews understand something about that culture. Ken Bailey, he's bound to be a scholarly guy, has discovered a wealth of insight on the parables from his study of traditional cultures of the Middle East. Throughout his travels, he has asked his Arab subjects one question hundreds of times. Have you ever known a son to come to his father and demand his inheritance? The answer is always the same. It would be unthinkable. It would be an unspeakable outrage, a gross insult to one's father and family. To us, the wayward son sin sounds like a little youthful foolishness or indiscretion. That he'd ask for cash to go see the world. But as Henri Nguyen states, the son's leaving is a heartless rejection of the home in which the son was born and nurtured, and a break with the most precious traditions of community and family, carefully upheld by the larger community of which he was a part. More than disrespect, it is a betrayal of the treasured values of family and community. The distant country is the world in which everything considered holy at home is completely disregarded. In a Middle Eastern setting, the son's offense was a grievous rejection of his family that could even force them to liquidate their estate early. The son didn't care if his father died or his family lost their farm. His only interest was in being able to enjoy life on his own terms. Bailey tells the story of one pastor whose parishioner came to him in great anguish, exclaiming, "My son wants me to die." The man's son had broached the question of his inheritance. In that culture, the son's inquiry expressed a wish for his father's demise. The elderly man was in good health, but 3 months later passed away. His wife lamented he died that night. The offense was so great that in a sense the man died the very night that the son had spoken to him. This model of God in Luke chapter 15 in the story of the prodigal son is literally of a father who is willing to die for his children. He divided the property, he swallowed his pride, and he lost his status in the community. Side note. Used to have 2 great theories of child rearing, now I have 2 children, and I have no great theories of child rearing. Is that fair? I'm going to tell you there were guys down at the city gate that held this father in horrible disrespect. There were fathers down there that said, "I'll tell you what, my boy comes to me for the inheritance. When he gets out of the hospital, we'll talk about it again." Always the experts on how to go through tough times with your kids are somebody who aren't your kid's mom and dad. Andy Stanley tells a story. I don't know if you've ever been to Atlanta. I've been there, but I haven't been to this place. There's apparently a hamburger place that's not very far from Georgia Tech and from the church where his dad preached. And he and his buddies snuck out, and they would drink milkshakes instead of going to church. And they could watch his dad on TV. So when they got in the car after church and his dad quizzed him about the sermon, they caught enough of the sermon to be able to say, oh, it was about the fill in the blank. Well, one day, Andy's dad's secretary saw he and his buddies sneaking out of church and watched them as they went to the milkshake place instead of coming to worship. Milkshakes and worship, that's a tough call for a kid of a certain age like me. He got in the car, and at that point, the jig was up. I mean, it was not going to go. His dad was driving, and he talked to him. He said, Andy, he said, Charlene said she saw you and Bob going down to the varsity, getting milkshakes during second service. And there was a pause, and you know how that is when your dad pauses, because you're thinking, wow, the nuclear option might be available. There's a possibility. There's a possibility there will be physical violence. Can I move to the point that his arm isn't long enough, or am I grounded forever, or whatever it is? And he said, you know what I told her, Andy? I said, Charlene, thank you. He said, you raise your kids and I'll raise mine. We've done damage, not by being concerned and prayerful about each other's kids, not by being mentors for them and there for them, not by sponsoring and working with our youth, not by teaching Bible classes or going to camp. But we've done damage when we got too much expertise about other people's kids. And I'm going to tell you, one of the ways this father died is that I can assure you that he was judged in the community for the grace and the mercy and the love that he showed to his kids. Secondly, God and the kingdom of heaven is one in which our Father initiates redemptive love. He's humble, he's proactive, he's engaging, he's involved. We're familiar with how he goes out to the younger son, but I've missed over the years how he goes out to the older son. You see that? See, even the older son who refuses to go in, this is a question of, I've humbled myself for the younger one. That father, under no circumstances, could keep his pride in that culture by going out to that older son. And yet he does. And there's some of us who are older brothers whose seats are in the pews, but our hearts are in the far country. And we need, just as desperately as our little brothers need Dad to be watching for them on the horizon, we need Dad, at least our idea of what our Father is about, to still be open to those of us who have been thoroughly churched. We've been churched to the point that there's a hard crust on our outside, that God is still willing to step out and engage with us. And when he does, you notice the language he uses. It's not really son, it's really my child. What is that? Some of you buried your dad a long, long time ago, but just be quiet for a second and think about what your dad called you in a loving way. Son, we got in the habit, I called every girl at a certain age girlfriend because I was coaching a lot of little girls and I didn't remember their names. Maybe he had a pet name for you. Maybe it's a nickname. When he wanted, not when he was angry, he used your whole name, but when he lovingly wanted to speak blessings to you, what did he call you? And that's what the Father calls the oldest son. He says, my child, you've always been with me. And everything I have belongs to you. See, he's speaking the language of relationship, and the oldest son is just as lost as the youngest son was in the far country. The youngest son didn't want to have a relationship with him and was open about it. The oldest son never had a great relationship with him here because he was too busy following the rules and trying to merit the Father's love. And now he's angry. He goes out. He calls him his child. And then he talks to him, and I got to believe he's got tears streaming down his face because he is so excited that his baby boy's home. And that older brother could not care less. And I've got to believe that when I look at people and I consider them to be well beyond God's grace, whether they're pursuing things that I don't agree with, or they're from a culture that's so deeply set against what I understand to be the culture that is God. When somebody's been doping so long, or drinking so long, or violent so long, and I tend just to write them off, and God has tears streaming down his face and says, "That's my son. I've called those people back here. How could you not be open and compassionate and caring about these younger brothers that I have called to be in the right relationship with me?" He initiates redemptive love. In The Applause of Heaven, Max writes about the anger that you might see in an older brother. There's a dangerous point at which anger ceases to be an emotion and becomes a driving force. A person that's bent on revenge moves unknowingly further and further away from being able to forgive. For to be without the anger is to be without an important, dare I say, essential source of energy for that person. Hatred is the rabid dog that turns on its owner. Revenge is the raging fire that consumes the arsonist. Bitterness is the trap that snares the hunter. And mercy is the choice that can set them all free. I know there aren't any angry older brothers at college, but I've run into a few in my law practice, and I've run into a few over in another part of North Creek. And they've got legitimate reasons to be disappointed and hurt, and I am always very willing to agree with them. It's not fair. But once you internalize that and use it long enough, there is a point at which you're not going to be able anymore to reconcile. I do estate planning and probate work, and I've got siblings especially. I've got siblings on a daily basis that are moving to a point that if any reconciliation is possible outside of God's grace, it's going to be at one of their funerals. That's the next time that they will move toward one another in right relationship. Because some of them have this anger that they cherish and they add to, and they keep those fires, those destructive, damning fires burning. And it's a shame. Lastly, the Father in the kingdom respects his children's choices. The story ends without resolution. Now, what I've done is great damage to it, because the first thing we're supposed to do is we're supposed to not do all the stuff I did with the parable, right? Stephen knows that. We're supposed to just keep it very simple. A parable doesn't have 46 applications. We're supposed to be careful not to go there. But the reality is that the Father respects the choices that both the older son and the younger son have made. He doesn't like them. They're not his wish or his will, but that's the dangerous thing about being in a relationship. You have to give people the freedom in a relationship to make choices that you disagree with, or else it's not a relationship. It wasn't, it had to be toward the beginning of the summer, in June. We're down in the Houston area, and my whole tribe is there, meaning mine and Laurie's daughters, sons-in-law, and granddaughter. And I'm holding the granddaughter, and I've done what you've done. Sometimes I haven't paid enough attention to the songs we're singing when we're singing. Okay? We really need to get better about that, to actually pay attention to the lyrics that we're singing. But I am busy with Ella and trying to keep her from being too rowdy. And I look over and I see the family. Laurie and I and Ella are on this row, and the rest of the family's in the front row. And it hits me that we are singing together when we all get to heaven. And that's the only thing that matters. Jobs, houses, cars, health, the fact that I have the most gorgeous grandchild in the world, that's neither here nor there. You see, God, the Father, cares so deeply even about people that I don't like, people that I disagree with, people that really bug me. He wants them to spend eternity with Him even more than I want my daughters and sons-in-law and grandchildren to spend eternity with me in His presence. That's how much He loves. And that's why He celebrates when that which was lost is found. There's a book, Gary Thomas wrote a book called Pure Pleasure. If I wanted the younger folks to read it, I'd act like it was really lurid. You know, pure pleasure. That might entice your mind. Really a very good book, and it's really not about husbands and wives and intimacy. But it really has indicted me with regard to how I don't do Sabbath and celebration very well. See, we model some things really well for our kids, like work ethic and duty. I think if you ask our kids, they'd say, check, check. But I'm not sure we modeled joy and celebration like I wish we had for them. And one of the things consistent throughout this chapter, whether you find a lost sheep or a lost coin or a lost son comes home, is they are joyful and they celebrate in community. Are we a tribe that's known for our celebration? Or let's be careful, are we maybe a tribe that's known for having some really tight restrictions on how we celebrate? Is that more fair? Because celebration can be dangerous, right? Life's not just one continuous party. But I'm afraid sometimes I've gone to another extreme, where I'm waiting for heaven to celebrate. And I don't think the kingdom of heaven is about waiting for heaven to celebrate. I think it's about rejoicing with people who rejoice right now. So if you're a mom or a dad or grandparent or great-grandparent, teacher or coach, mentor or sponsor, if you're a member of Christ Church, you worship a God that has called us to have a redeeming, grace-filled theology with regard to the younger brothers of this world. Pray without ceasing. Some of you can think in your families right now, you've got younger brothers that are still in a far country, and you've got relationships that are broken in this way. You know it's not God's will, and you maybe even think there's nothing that can happen that will change it. Now, we don't worship a God that's dealing a lot with statistics and possibilities. We worship a God that deals with what's impossible, and there is nothing impossible with God.